Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, actually third webinar on the strategy-driven supply chain. And after two previous webinars where we introduced a couple of building blocks, I'm very excited to have a panel discussion today. And let me briefly talk you through the agenda for today. So in a minute, I will introduce Ton Geurts as our moderator of the panel. Ton will briefly introduce our panel members, our dear panel members. I will very briefly, in 5 minutes, again, just try to summarize strategy-driven supply chain. What are the key concepts? Then each of the panel members will talk you through what their experiences are from working with these concepts within their companies, and then we will open up to hopefully many interesting questions from all of you, and Ton will help us to moderate the debate with this very experienced panel we have here in front of us. So quick introduction of Ton. Ton, thank you for accepting to be the moderator today. I met Ton at his time at Bekaert, where he was CPO and SVP for supply chain. Ton also actively contributed to my first book, Supply Chain Strategy and Financial Metrics. And we used some of those concepts to also create more awareness within Bekaert on topics like working capital. And as you can see, he has already a quite filled career with multiple exec roles at companies like DSM and AkzoNobel. He's also a person with the heart at the right place, as you can see from his involvement at Solidaridad, which is an NGO. And he's currently working for BISCI, and BISCI stands for Brightlands Institute for Supply Chain Innovation. So in his role, Ton is bringing together academia and companies and working on supply chain innovation in anything which is digital and with a lot of passion for sustainability. And with that short intro, Ton, I'm happy to pass the word to you to introduce our panel members.
Thank you very much, Bram. Welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure and my privilege to be in this webinar, and I will try to serve as best. I will start introducing the three panel members. And before we started, I said already, how unique is this? We have on my screen on the left, Stefano Pietroni from Barilla. And Barilla, the leading global brand in pasta. Even in my 2030 Harvard days, one of the famous supply chain cases at Harvard Business School is from Barilla, because they expanded and grew tremendously all over the world. And I'm sure Stefano will introduce himself further onto this and the specialties of the company. But it is also a product that they make, which is not only nice to eat and fantastic to eat, but it fits in a sustainable world. And for sure, we're going to discuss today as well that sustainability is also in the heart of strategy and supply chain. In the middle is Kelly Goodson-Solholm, Novo Nordisk, and there we have a unique leader in the pharma industry, because they treat, well informed, more or less half of the world's diabetes. A disease is, of course, that is part of our way we live and the world we live in. But a very noble, long-standing company already, where I had the privilege to travel to as a young lawyer when we were working on collaboration in enzymatic technologies as DSM with them. So welcome. And then the third one is Frank Haunert from BASF. BASF is already for a long time the company that can say we are the leading chemical company. And I'm very privileged that also BASF is in. BASF was one of our top partners in AkzoNobel in collaboration. And if you are leading in the coatings industry, we were buying from BASF, selling to BASF, and competing with BASF. So we had quite a complicated but also positively challenging supply chain entanglement. And I saw recently how the CEO, Martin Brodermüller of BASF, or the Capital Markets, they explained already their new strategy for 2030 on CO2 emissions. And I'm sure that Frank will illustrate in his story also how sustainability is as well part of the strategy to drive supply chain management in that company. So 3 very different industries, 3 very senior leaders. So I'm very pleased that they want to be part of this panel forum. And Bram, then back to you.
Thank you, Ton, and thank you also in my name to all 3 of the panel members. Let me quickly take you through some key concepts, and I have the challenge to do that in 5 minutes. I've been practicing all morning. So I briefly want to talk about supply chain triangle, how strategy impacts the balance in the triangle, how we can better connect the strategy and the supply chain, why we need to better connect different layers in the planning, and what I envision as the future role of supply chain. So let's start with that supply chain triangle. What it captures is the struggle in companies to balance service, cost, and cash, and also that different functions, different departments often pull a different corner in the triangle. The triangle also allows to capture that balancing the triangle is not optional, it's really mandatory, because balancing the triangle is about generating value or optimizing value. Value as measured to the return on capital employed. In spoken language, the bang for the buck. So if I invest $1, that's the buck. What do you give me as a margin in return? What's the bang? Strategy impacts the balance in the triangle. If we just compare 2 types of players, like a lowest price player and a differentiation player in the market, if we look at the cost, and we now have a cost axis, for sure the lowest price player will have the lowest cost. But they don't just have the lowest cost, they typically also have a lower capital employed. They have a more simple business. They don't like complexity. So they will typically have less inventories. They will be able to better sweat the assets. If I start differentiating, typically it's driving up the cost. It's also driving more inventory, and more difficult assets. So the asset turns will be lower. So higher costs, more capital employed. But the good news is that if I differentiate well, I'm able to drive a higher margin because of my differentiated position. And linking that back to the ROCE, what you see here on the right is that in essence, different strategies are just different routes to generate ROCE in a different ratio of margin, EBIT, and investment capital employed. So the lowest price player will typically work with minimal margins, but will compensate with having a minimum capital employed. If I start differentiating, I have more complexity. More complexity results in more assets, in more inventories, but all is fine as long as I can drive a premium from my customers for that. How can we better connect strategy and supply chain? Well, again, we start from the triangle, and we start by analyzing the service side of the triangle. Look at your market, try to understand what are the different value drivers in the market, try to understand what does it mean to be at par, what does it mean to differentiate or to dominate the market. Then define a strategic value proposition. Strategic because you have to make a choice. You can choose one dimension on which you want to dominate, a second on which you want to differentiate, and you'll have to accept that on the other value drivers, you will play at par. The market and the value proposition trigger a certain complexity and variability. And in the side of that complexity and variability, I need to design my desired responsiveness. So what will be lead times, reliabilities, and what type of flexibility do I want to have? The complexity, variability, responsiveness basically help me to design my supply chain in a strategy-driven way. And I really need to understand that supply chain to be able to understand what is the cost level and the investment level, the capital employed level. So that market side here, and that value proposition really needs to go together with the supply chain. Only when I know the two, I understand the cost and the capital employed, and I basically understand my value model. So am I more focused on efficiency, or do I want to differentiate and be more responsive? Yeah. Who do I want to be? Do I want to be the Ryanair in my market, or do I want to be the Etihad in my market? And that really translates into the supply chain and into a different value model. There is a need to better integrate planning processes if we want to better balance the triangle. And here I'll pick the topic of IBP, Integrated Business Planning. What is IBP? Well, it's basically a monetization of the volume plan, a monetization of the more operational volume S&OP plan. But okay, what is the result of IBP? Yeah, we are shifting the boundaries a little bit, but I see that most often finance still has their own planning processes and has their own planning tools. And if you take 2 steps back, what are we doing as companies? Yeah, we have quite robust planning processes and tools in supply chain. We are duplicating that effort in the finance department, and then we are tripling the effort by trying to integrate the two. We even have a name for that, it's IBP. That's not necessarily the best use of resources in a company. So the vision we line out in the book is really to fully integrate the different layers of planning in a company. And we call that integrated value planning and execution, or IVP&E. And you could say that IVP&E is really like the next step beyond S&OP and IBP. And it also impacts our vision for the future role of supply chain, which is the 5th point I want to come to. Whether we like it or not, in many companies, supply chain is still like semi-operational. We run customer service, we run logistics, and we might have S&OP. And we also see that the planning processes in companies are still quite scattered. And above all, we struggle with balancing the triangle. So how do we want to solve this? In our vision, the future role of supply chain is really at the center, at the heart of that supply chain triangle. And I believe it's okay to have strong functions with strong functional KPIs, but we need to more explicitly balance that with a balancing function, being supply chain, with a balancing metric like the ROCE as the key metric. And of course, we don't want to make supply chain into a paper tiger. So what will then be the power of supply chain? How do we bring that balance? Well, the proposal there is that we leave customer service and logistics as operational functions to operations. But that with supply chain, we really concentrate those different layers of planning: strategic, financial, operational planning. And it's not that supply chain will define the strategy. No, it will be up to supply chain to moderate the debate, basically, as supply chain is currently running the S&OP process. If we manage to do this, what we will do is basically transition from a more tension or conflict-driven organization model into a more strategy and value-driven organization model. And where to start? Those are 7 steps here on beneath. It's also written in the book. It will start with creating awareness. It's not that people are not willing to accept some of the things we say here, but there is a lack of understanding, right? And there's a lot of education to be done. We need to help people to really make the connection between strategy and finance and supply chain. And there is a role for supply chain in that education. For me, we need to act as missionaries. We really need to spread this knowledge and spread this message. And once there is awareness, we will need to start envision, okay, where are we today and where do we want to go? So I invite people to draw a triangle with the executive team and to understand, okay, what is our current struggle in the triangle, and how sharp is our current value proposition, and how well aligned is our supply chain to that value proposition, and what are the current process and tooling and people capabilities when it comes to planning. So where are we today and where do we want to go? And it's cross-functional. So we will need to put a lot of effort in engaging people. So how do we get sales on board? How do we get finance on board? Certainly, if we would start changing roles and responsibilities or hierarchies, it's very key to engage people. Before, of course, we then design it into more detail. To come to implementation and understand that once you implement, you will need to improve before you can basically sustain. Yeah? And that's really, in a short note, Tom, some key concepts. And I'll give the word back to you to introduce our keynote speakers or our panel members.
Thank you, Bram. I think very condensed, very to the point. Before I go to the keynote speakers, that I also say from my experience in the past, it is really extremely important that you understand the dynamics in cost, cash, and service in that triangle, and how it links then to your working capital and return on capital employed. An example from Beckert I want to share is that once I understood fully what is in the core and in the heart of what Bram is saying, we looked in Beckert in those years, 2013-14, to 31% working capital. With a new CEO on board, and I was coming from the chemical industry, from coatings in the last job, we brought back 21 to 12%. So I said to the CEO, yeah, you can do absolutely very different things. And within a year, we brought up on the scale of that company such a return on capital employed, lowering the working capital, that with freeing up the cash from the working capital, we could do a fantastic acquisition of 5 production sites on tire cord with Pirelli. So just to show you in one example how understanding how all these mechanisms work and putting functions together can contribute to the success of a company. Now, Stefano, this was a small example. There's a few minutes where you will share Barillo and a few of your keynotes on this subject matter with the audience, and the floor is yours. Please.
Yeah, thanks. So I don't know who is running the deck. I think just a brief introduction of Barilla. Barilla, by the way, is not only pasta, so it's very well known about pasta quite overseas, but one of the main business is bakery business, that is mainly a regional business here, and sauces business as well. So I mean, it's at least 6 different supply chains that here you see in a snapshot. So it's a company that has grown in the last decade very fast in terms of volumes, especially in the United States, where we have grown up to the first market share in a very relatively low little time. And in Russia, for example, where we have established now a second plant of pasta. But mostly the case, I think, is important to see how this business has grown from mainly a value and a volume trade-off that is different from the different supply chains and the different business. So we are organized in supply chain as a unique control tower. So I mean, our supply chain has a global supply chain officer. I'm referring to him, covering the processes for planning, network design, and customer service. And through different local teams, mainly for forecast and for customer service, that are the only 2 branch of supply chain localized, except the plants, we have global supply chain delivering the product for pasta, for example, for sauces as well, from regional plants that are typically global plants for pasta. And for bakeries are plants that are devoted to a cluster of nation, for example, for Vasa in the Nordics, that is a brand of Barilla, for Aris in France, that is a fresh bakery business in France. And just connecting so what is the connection between the theory that we have seen and the practice of that is a purpose of the meeting? So I mean, we have the linkage between strategy, finance, and supply for us is very key in order to make a very good trade-off in terms of decisions. So the interdependency that we have in terms of following a strategy of growth in volume for us is one thing, and maintaining a basic relation in terms of value in another business is another point. So that we have business that grow up through a lot of capex involved, because as you have seen by visiting our one of our line is a state-of-the-art line of pasta, is a very big investment. And so when we have to manage this kind of investment, we need to have a clear relation between the growth, the service, and the revenues that you can get from this business, and the capital employed. So I mean, the relation between the working capital that you deserve to run the business, the capex, the depreciation, amortization. So all these things come to a point of real point of reality, that is the return on capital employed. So I mean, for us, it's very clear in the strategy that we have to follow in this growth, this kind of relations, and we have taken a very good opportunity to follow, let me say, the course of lesson involving some, for example, business that we have in at some point moving from the growth in volume, like for example pasta, shifting to a growth in value, because it's really a big point for our business of pasta today, because the commodization of pasta in some areas of the world has put in danger the marginality of our product. So we need to recover a clear relation between the growth in volume and the growth in value. The company is pursuing the IBP, so as an instrument to really connect together the different horizon decisions that you can have in the planning, with a strategy to grow in volume that is very well balanced with a growing value, and managing the decision in a clear understanding of this relation. Another good point that we have seen is about the benchmarking. So I mean, it's really important to look not only into our internal decision, our internal assets, but also linking what others are doing in the same field. And I think the linkage that this process has pointed out is very, very peculiar.
Thank you very much for this contribution, and that you could confirm to the audience, for instance, that you do this also in shared targets with other functions, because it sounds that you are quite deep into the 7 steps that Bram has been sharing.
Unfortunately, it's not so much the case. I think we have, through also the internal workshop that we have done during the program, we have settled, let me say, some evangelists, let me say, in the finance and strategy and the supply chain, and the process is going that way. The CEO is very committed in order to understand the balance on that, but we have still some points to round up in the organization, because obviously the transformation and change is clear. So the investment on also a clear system of KPIs, and a good understandable system of retrieving KPIs from to support the IBP is really important. And I think technology here today plays a very good role in doing that.
I'm very happy with your honesty, Stefano, because on the one side you confirm you need full commitment from the CEO and the top management layer, but then you were honest enough to say you're not there yet completely. Because what I always share with Bram is you can bring a lot of tools, technology, systematics, mathematics, but a lot to get this done is change management, transformation management, and the people's willingness. So with that, because I have to look my time, but thanks very lot. The honesty, the openness is really appreciated, Stefano. Then we move here to Kelly Goodson from Novo Nordisk. A different light, yes, from a different industry. Kelly, please.
Super, thank you, Ton. And if we just get to the next slide. Yes, super. So very quickly on Novo Nordisk, for those of you that aren't familiar with our company, We are in the healthcare industry. We'll be recognizing our 100-year anniversary here in 23. And I should mention we are celebrating actually our 100 years of when insulin was found. Actually, that's just relevant for everyone to know. We're, as you can imagine, in the diabetes business, which is the bulk of our sales, but we're also in obesity, growth disorder, and hemophilia. And based on some of our clinical trials, moving into new therapy areas as well. We have products marketed throughout the world, 169 countries to date. We have sales around 127 billion, that's in Danish krona. And I think a really interesting point to note is we actually supply nearly 50% of the world's insulin. So where I'm sitting currently in our production space, we're quite busy ensuring that insulin can reach the patients who need it. And then we have around 32.8 million people using our products. I think it's relevant to note here on the little map right under, our strategic production sites are in Denmark, Brazil, China, France, and US. And that's where I'm sitting today as head of our business support, with responsibility over these sites, focused on everything from finance, supply chain, IT, strategy, etc. If we go to the next slide, then I really want to focus on what my takeaways were from the masterclass and from the book. And it's been, again, I've learned really a lot, and I'm definitely still learning, as I continue to take this and then bring it into the organization. And what I put here is really rosy as a start, but then also maybe as an end as well. But it's more about how we're a quite metric-oriented company. So then let's start with metrics, which that is what people like to see. And that's why I noted that as the overall heading. I think throughout this, I've been very inspired by Bram. And I mean, strategy is about making choices. I think that that's very clear to all of us. But yet I think I've had the fortunate state to be able to sit in the different parts of the organization, in commercial, in corporate finance, now in supply chain and manufacturing. And really, again, how good are we about making those choices and how they impact ultimately our business and supply chain. It's all about balance in our decision making, and that's where I think this return on capital employed is an excellent measure. Stefano mentioned it, but I also really appreciated this benchmark view, and also taking it a step further to understand not just the high level inventory turns or looking at margins across our benchmark, but also getting a deeper understanding of the complexity and variability, which are the key to really understanding the strategies and how they're deployed. And then last but not least, I mean, I think this is an amazing opportunity for all of us in the organization to break down our silos and really how can we come together, finance, commercial, operations, with supply chain in the heart of the triangle to make sure we can make the best business decisions. And this book gave me even more energy to make that a reality, not just something on a slide or on pages. I think the why, there are various, focus on improving our working capital. I think that's great, but improving working capital in a silo, again, may lead us to not make the right choices. So that's something I'm trying to bring forward into relevant fora to ensure those trade-offs are discussed. In the new therapy areas I mentioned, we have a great opportunity, again, to ensure alignment between strategy and supply chain response. I also, again, have appreciated the opportunity to reflect with the peers on the line here today who I've had the chance to meet, but many others. I think this is a great chance for us across functions to actually come together with what we know from finance or supply chain or commercial, and all contribute to the better good of the companies we're working for. And then I think that was the last one, how do we bring this forward? And that's actually what we're doing as we speak. So we've put this as a use case or project for a group of our talents who are in a talent development program, where we've said, okay, we want to work with return on capital employed. Let's make sure we talk about the why. That's very clear from the book, so I'll be able to support them there. But how could we do it in Novo Nordisk? And what does good look like? And then create a dialogue and determine which fora it would be relevant to bring this forward. So Ton, that's what I had.
I too, of course, we have a very limited time. What fascinates me, because Stefano shared, honestly, he is still building on IBP. Yeah. Is in your company integrated business planning even up to financial planning? Is that in a way digitized, automated, or is that all what you discussed with us also driven by pure management skills?
I think somewhat management skills, a little bit of systems to support us, but I think the integration we can do even better. I think we are looking at some new systems to help us get there faster. But I really, again, think the system part is helpful, but I also think the mindset is what's needed to get there. And that's, again, not finance looking at budgeting as a standalone finance process, S&OP being a supply chain process, etc. It's really about, again, true integration in our mindset and bringing those topics to the table. So I think we still have some way to go, but I think it's clear where we want to head for sure.
That's super. Now, with the last question I would like to ask you, but also there a very short answer, then we go to BSF. Sure. I appreciate a lot to hear from both panelists already now that you have so much shared targets and joint KPIs, etc. Can I also ask you whether the sustainability goals towards, for instance, 2030 are also integrated in this shared target thinking, or is that still something that needs to sink in deeper and is not yet integrated?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely integrated in the way we talk about our goals. Actually, if you have the opportunity to read our corporate annual report, then we have 4 strategic aspirations areas, of which purpose and sustainability is the first quadrant. So I believe it's integrated. It's becoming more and more, though, throughout the organization, if that makes sense, Ton. So I think I do find as though when we're looking at business cases or trade-offs, sustainability is a component we're bringing to the table, though. So yeah, I think we're well on our way, but of course, to ensure we have the systems and the data, et cetera, in place, that's where we still have some work to do.
Thank you. And again, and it is a journey, but this leads me then to go to Frank Hounert from BSF. And I'm sure that he can also shed a small light how CO2 and calculations on footprint are part of supply chain thinking for BSF. Frank, the floor is yours.
Yeah, Ton, thank you very much for the introduction. And Bram, thank you very much for the invitation. Let me shortly introduce BSF to you. And here you see already a photo of our biggest site in Ludwigshafen in Germany. BSF is basically a chemical company with approximately 60 billion euro sales revenue, more than 110,000 employees, and more than 90,000 customers worldwide. Our product portfolio ranges from basic chemicals, materials, to industrial solutions. You talked already about coatings, surface technologies, nutrition and care, healthcare products, and also agricultural solutions. Coming more from a supply chain perspective, we are talking here about more than 200 or almost 240 production sites, 2,400 warehouses, and more than 270,000 SKUs. So just when looking here, for example, at the Ludwigshafen site, we are talking here about 2,000 trucks per day in and out. In a nutshell, we believe we are operating a very complex and maybe one of the most complex supply chain structures in the world. And on top of this, you see the last point, and Ton already highlighted to this, with our corporate purpose. We create chemistry for a sustainable future. We also made announcements that we aim to reach net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. For an energy intensive industry like the chemical industry, this is a highly ambitious target, and with currently available technology, to be honest, not reachable. This will only work by developing new innovative technologies, avoiding CO2 emissions, and supply chain will play a vital part for developing those technologies and the CO2 emission framework for that. On the other hand, we of course also need then the supporting regulatory framework, providing, for example, sufficient competitive renewable energy, without saying. But let me come to the key takeaways from the strategy-driven supply chain concept. And here also, again, thanks to Bram for doing the masterclass, writing the book, and basically bringing everything together. And I also learned quite a lot from this. And we are now actually also applying a lot of ideas and concepts in BSF, because I believe the concept really provides a powerful framework for integrating different functions, to talking the same language across different units, integrating, as you say it, strategy, finance, and supply chain. And I think it's even more beyond this. integrating sales, marketing, business management. All this comes together, talking the same language and following a common joint target in the end. Taking BASF, for example, you have seen they are a huge, quite complex company, and finance, of course, plays an important role and has with the CFO a very powerful seat at the table. Supply chain is also, to be honest, most often not at the table. It becomes only visible when things are not moving or the inventory is too high. However, considering what actually supply chain is all about, and here I like the description about the triangle of service, cost, and cash very much. Supply chain management is all about balancing the supply chain triangle of service, cost, and cash every day. And ROCE is a powerful KPI allowing finance and supply chain to speak common language. For example, right now in BASF, we have ROCE as the key KPI for all of BASF. And we have clear, everybody of us has clear ROCE target in the personal target agreement. Supply chain colleagues understanding this concept helps to speak the same language as other units, particularly finance and business management, and to get heard. That's important. When speaking the same language first, we then can talk about strategy and how strategy drives supply chain, finance, and the overall company. And as you rightly said, it's all about making choices. Still, supply chain needs to learn how to convince the business management and also the top management what meaningful targets are. The multidimensional or 2D benchmarking is a very powerful tool and easy to understand how to achieve this. And latest here at this point, finance and business management will listen to supply chain and acknowledge those convincing benchmarks and arguments. And this we already do in practice. Last but not least, you introduced the integrated value planning and execution. And this is, to my understanding, the final piece in the overall artwork to get supply chain a seat at the table and integrate strategy, finance, and other units, including supply chain. To be honest, we in BASF, we are not yet there. Yeah, we still fight for our seat at the table, but the concept shows the way. And I'm very confident that when communicating more and sharing this concept more and more, we will also be there and get a seat at the table for supply chain.
Beautiful contribution. Also, the last part that you are also on a journey. Now, can I ask you the question, is it indeed nowadays the case every business unit is tracked and traced on KPIs, and that there is that comparisons are made at Vorstands level, how each business unit in here, so every 200, 400, 1 billion business is run, so that you have a very kind of number and fact-based comparison throughout your vast company?
We did a couple of years ago a global BASF corporate supply chain strategy with the outcome that every of our 11 operating divisions is accountable for its supply chain. So we don't have a chief supply chain officer, but basically each and every operating division is accountable for its own supply chain. We as an in-house supply chain consulting unit are basically putting our arms around this and are kind of an umbrella in order to share best practices and bring each of the supply chains, basically the brain for everything, to the next level. And this, of course, one prerequisite of being able to do so is having the numbers right at hand and being able to monitor, to track, and also to benchmark, to compare different supply chains in different businesses, knowing that different businesses have different supply chain requirements, but we can compare them, yes.
Thank you. Now, this rounds up the panel discussions for the beginning. We now go, Bram, into questions from the audience and panel discussions that I'm allowed to lead. Now, I have one question that is on my lips because we have three top executives here that represent three global multinationals. Where are we in career ladders? Is a role in the top of supply chain a condition needed to get into the top of general management? Second thought I have, should there be more integration, for instance, that the CPO and the head of supply chain should become in the same hands, like I know that a Unilever is practicing? What are your views on functional silos or integrating this, and in how far is a top performance in supply chain a condition for a career? Stefano, what may I ask you?
I think especially the last one is very very amazing and very fancy. So I mean, it's in a fast mover consumer good like my company is, I think obviously and quite always we have seen at the top mostly marketing or finance. We do think a lot of the company stands on because of supply chain efficiency. I mean, it's if you imagine that our cost of goods sold represent at least sometimes 50–60% of net sales, you can imagine how much is any dime you can scrap from a case of pasta becomes really important. And at the same time, the service level that you are committed to our business-to-business retailer, it's about having a completeness. For example, from non-constrained demand of 98.5% by row and by case. So I mean, it's this level of expectation sometimes puts supply chain in the role quite, I say quite oftenly, to have a last word about a lot of business case in innovation, a lot of business case in marginal transformation, and also in managing some transformation also in the process unit. So I do think that our community has one problem, that is the communication. I mean, sometimes the supply chain is perceived as the complex word, not very explicable to the others in a situation that could be represented as, for example, I do think that this kind of analogical models helps the communication of supply chain synthesis to the other marketing, sales, and other process unit, and could put us in a situation as a community to play a relevant role, not only for the cost, but also for the sustainability, as you said, because a lot of innovation and a lot of businesses care about sustainability. And I do think that being efficient in supply chain, managing the commitment with the client in terms of the good ratio between cost to serve and service level is the kind of discussion that could lead to better sustainability. That is at the end what is really carrying now the consumers. And we want our supply chain leaders to grow up from different job rotation along the chain, not vertical. We need some vertical, for example, in engineering, for some vertical in some other technical roles, but most of the case, I think our talent grow up and do present for the first line also in that way. So I think human will play in supply chain a first role play in the next future because of combination of quality, sustainability, and efficiency.
Good, thank you, Stefano. Again, that is a mix-up, but I'm a people that know me from the past. I love to have a very diverse team, all parts of the globe, but also I like to catch a thief with a thief. So I love to have somebody from operations in CAPEX. I love to have somebody from corporate services into corporate services environment, etc. A marketeer should also, if of course he has a numeric feeling, otherwise it doesn't help much in supply chain, but that's the way to the top. I got now two questions from the audience that are linked to each other. One is from a person I know that also Bisky works with, Roland. I will quote your question. Roland is a COO of Mona Packaging. with a platinum rating and ranking in EcoVadis. So half of their business is sustainable packaging. But the question here is, maybe with a wink in his eye, but also serious, will there be also a change from the triangle to a square with sustainability in one corner in combination with the other three? And it is combined with a question from Johan Heyman, who is asking us, how do you see sustainability targets, CO2 reductions, and the impact on the supply chain triangle? Frank or Kelly, how would you see this? Because Bram will close off and he can think whether a quadrant can still serve the job next to a triangle. But what do the pharma or the chemical industry see here?
Maybe starting from the chemical perspective, how are we defining sustainability? And this is interesting comparison or link also to the supply chain triangle. We define sustainability as balancing social, environmental, and economic aspects. So it's kind of also our sustainability definition is kind of a triangle which asks for balancing. It's not only about environmental protection, it's also to consider social aspects and of course economic success in the end. Yeah? And therefore, to my understanding, this very much fits also into the supply chain triangle with cash, cost, and service. It's adding additional elements to this. And of course, if you integrate this in order to create value out of a higher service level, reduced cost, reduced cash level that you need, plus environmental protection, plus additional standards for social governance, I think we might not end up with talking about a triangle, but let's say, how would you call this? Different angles from different sides that all need to be balanced in the end. And this is at least how I see this from a BASF perspective. Sustainability is an important part, and supply chain plays an important part in sustainability and vice versa. So this all is interdependent.
That's, I think, the youngest dynamic of supply chain cost calculations and operations cost calculations that I think is something from the last 2 years. Before that, I didn't see too many people do this. This fits, of course, the youngest strategy of BASF as well. But I don't want to ask you again, Frank, but I saw Kelly nodding. Kelly, this thinking that CO2 is part of cost modeling or CO2 is part of the responsibility how you produce, is that also already part in the pharma world or in your company?
Very, very much so. So yes, so I think we're quite conscious and more than conscious, want to do our part again to reduce the emissions from our production. I think similar to what Frank said, I mean, the triple bottom line is something we've been talking about for many years. Also a triangle, of course, and yeah, but but I think gathering my thoughts here, I mean, when I see the triangle, I think we also talked in the masterclass and dialogue with my peers that maybe a pyramid at some point. So maybe not a square, but you know, that the triangle is a more three-dimensional type object where sustainability becomes, you know, part of it. Because I think as we're all seeing as business leaders, sustainability is a requirement, I think, for us to be successful in the future. But I think it also goes back to the integration. We need to make sure we have the data, you know, when we're at the table looking at ROCE, we also understand the environmental aspects of it so that we can understand those trade-offs as well. Today, we're looking at air versus sea and some of those items. But I think as you go into, as companies become even more sharp, there will be new possibilities, I think, that we need to look at and then consider the trade-offs.
True. And when you say ROCE and cost, what trickled my mind was we have seen now that the cost for CO2 are rising to 50 euros a ton and 75 is predicted. We are working also on a multimodal shift from 300 trucks a day to the rail for the leftover last one Dutch car maker, because it's for him cost modeling nowadays. It's production cost modeling. But I see Bram thinking, and Bram, you're not part of the panel as such, but this question from the audience, whether the triangle could even become a different shape, and that this whole sustainability thinking as a differentiator in business is also becoming part of strategic value-based supply chain management. What is your view there?
The least thing I can say is that What I see is that it becomes a value driver. Like you say, okay, I can try to, if I take product quality, I can try to be at par, I can try to differentiate, or I can try to dominate. And I think sustainability is becoming a potential value driver. There are certain requirements, so at least you will need to be at par. And I think regulations will also help to like define a certain base. But there is an opportunity to differentiate or to even dominate, and there is a market where people say, hey, instead of just being at par, I'm really looking for companies who make sustainability one of their key pillars and are ahead of what other companies are doing. So I don't see it necessarily as conflicting. It's again like, if you just be at par, most probably you are not willing to make extra cost or carry extra.
No, I think nobody wanted to talk about a conflict.
Yep.
I believe that the common denominator from the panelists and also the questions in the audience are that it fits in the heart of the strategy thinking and the 7 steps that are in at the end of your last book, and that it helps the company to be the differentiator in the marketplace. Maybe Stefano, you also have your view how this plays a role in keeping Barello as the leader in the marketplace.
Sure. Sustainability for us has become the last decade, even before. I think if you think at the basic sentence of our business, it is give what you would give to your own child, or good for you, good for the planet is our mantra, in order to set the consumer at the center of the choices, in order to drive the choices towards the best sustainable offer that you can have in terms of balance between what you need in terms of human, in terms of injunction of kilocalories, in terms of Mediterranean. We promote the Mediterranean diet, for example. And related to that, how this diet burn less energy from the planet. I mean, if you as an individual choose some diet, you contribute relevant individually, globally, to draw down the little part of energy that is needed to manage this. And I think we have made even a think tank about that is called the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition, that started 15 years ago, also to influence the communities we live in, having inside some Nobel Prize also, in order to manage the different connection between this promise to be sustainable. In the operative part of our business, if you imagine that the plant director and his staff as target for quality, for economy, and for sustainability, with ratios of sustainability that are in the same balance between the other two. So I mean, there are a long time of drawdown of a ratio of consumption. So being consistent from whatever we do on our operative part, what we do in the recipes of our products, and make it very effective also in the communication to the public.
To build on you, Stefano, there is a sustainable financial disclosure regulation now, just published by the EU. So the financial performance and the sustainability performance driven by supply chain is now also a fact. But I'm happy to hear this, Bram, and also for the whole audience on the webinar, how much this 4th leg is growing and also comes into the heart of play. To also share with all of us, I think we all have seen over the recent time how investors are thinking about financial performance of a company, but also sustainability performance. BlackRock was not the first mover, but now they pretend that every investment is important. If you go to Belgium KBC Bank, they have published they will not invest any longer in companies that are not leading in sustainability. But on the other hand, they give favorite interest rates to companies that are leading in for sustainability. So ultimately, the way you perform here is also of influence to your working capital, your ROCE, etc. Bram, I also want to give you a few words because you have been listening most of the time. Because I was impressed because the panelists have been your students. At the same time, they are top executives. But it seems they have been, they are mastering what you have at heart tremendously. So what's your feedback?
Well, I think I'm excited as they are, Tom. That what is when you write this type of book and you have certain ideas in your mind, you of course do it with the reference frame you have. So you've been talking to companies and you've done projects and you've been hitting the wall, but yeah, being able to talk about that and teach about that, but especially interact about these concepts with leading executives from leading companies and seeing that it makes a lot of sense to them, and just not makes sense, but that they actively use these concepts to start moving the boundaries of supply chain and better connect different functions with as a goal being more aware of who do we want to be as a company and where do we want to make the difference and how do we create more value, financial value, but basically value for all the stakeholders and for society as a whole. Yeah, that I think this for me is most exciting. So I also want to, because we're coming close to the end, I think that's almost a good timing for me to just thank Stefano, Kelly, Frank, first of all, for your enthusiasm during our masterclass we had on strategy-driven supply chain, for making the time to share your experiences and share also your passion for these concepts and the potential of these concepts. I can talk about it, but if you talk about it, it resonates much harder. So thank you for that. And Ton, special thanks also for you to moderate this from your rich background, and I've said that in the past. So for also mentoring me a bit. So also thank you for contributing here today and for all the discussions we had on that before. And I think with that, we unfortunately will need to close this webinar. Thank you all also for joining and for attending, for your questions. Looking forward to continue the discussion at the next occasion.
It inspired me also a lot what the three of you brought to the table, and that this supply chain role is and belongs at the top of the company. And thank you, Bram, to do me the honor. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all,
Bye-bye.
listeners.